The pendulum has swung too far in the direction of superficial online communications at a time when people are hungry for true human connection.
Fanocracy is when fans rule.
One thing I've noticed, because of course, your mom, my wife, is Japanese, and you are half. And you have many friends who are mixed race. You have many friends who are LGBTQ of one sort or another. I've noticed that, because I'm much more conscious of it now, that most advertisers do not get that right. Most marketers do not get that right. Most the ways that companies communicate, either they don't get it right or they're so obvious in trying to that they fail. How can organizations understand diversity from the perspective of true diversity rather than trying to force, I'm diverse, look at me?
Well, it's two levels, I think. One, like I want to see someone who looks like me, who acts like me, who has the same background as me in advertising, on TV, in stories I read, and in companies I go to, right? I want to be able to connect in that way. And I want to know that this company understands that. But on the other hand, on the other side of that, I want that to not just be surface. It's not just a show for me to come in and say, oh, look, I see that. It has to be the people behind the camera. It has to be the people making the decisions. It has to be the higher ups actually having those identities, or else it seems very fake because they actually don't know what they're talking about, right?
The 50-year-old white men who are behind the scenes telling the paid people to do something doesn't work.
Exactly, because it's always going to come off as fake because it is. You're making something up, right? It's a fictional version of diversity instead of actually thinking about that, and a lot of times that is why fandoms develop. It's not necessarily just that they love something so much and want to emulate it perfectly. Oftentimes I see fandoms as transforming the original, saying, I like this as an idea, but I'd like to see a few more people like me. Right. And so you either get groups of people who are doing the similar thing, but hey, there's a little bit more diversity, or people who write stories that are like, nah, I'd rather, see a few more people like me in that.
And I've also noticed, I'm really interested in your take on this, I've also noticed that when companies try to be diverse, they toss in, for example, an African American, or they toss in an Asian, and nobody gets the whole rainbow idea. I mean, Barack Obama he's not black, he's half black. You're half Japanese. And I feel like in 300 years, we're all going to be mixed race. All humans are going to be mixed race. That's sort of what I believe. And how about the idea of these companies that try to be diverse and then they just grab kind of these tokens and put them in there?
The problem with tokens is also that it's very easy to talk over a token. And part of it is adding to the conversation. What we want as an end goal in diversity is a change in the system, the whole thing, right? But having one person who, like one Asian woman in a sea of white men, which I've experienced sometimes in medicine, it's really hard to say what you want to say because of the power dynamic. And so the true diversity is one that people feel able to actually be comfortable saying what they want and be comfortable making the changes that they envision. And it's also one person is not the speaker of their entire race or their entire identity. And so you need that whole diversity to be like, you know what, these are our ideas. I'm able to say my ideas. I'm able to feel comfortable speaking like this, but we're going to talk about it as a whole group and then make decisions going forward instead of being a token being seen, and then being completely ignored.
I want to know,
Okay.
how can businesses better relate on a fandom level to millennials?
To millennials. So I think we grew up in a time that is a lot more connected. We see a lot more, we're able to, and there's less of a barrier to communicating to a lot of people. And so you see it with YouTube stars, you see it with people who get famous on Instagram, and it's just so much easier to like feel closer to people that are far away from you. And I think they often don't understand that, and so when they're trying to advertise, they don't realize that we're much more literate in that sort of internet marketing than they might be.
Right. You probably are.
So we are very quick to be like, that you're just advertising to us. I'm just gonna not pay attention. Or install an ad blocker and not see it anyway.
Right.
You know, so I think it's a lot to do with we have control over what we want to see. And so to communicate to us, you have to actually like listen to us, think about what we want to hear, how are you going to actually help us, and join the fandoms or allow the fandoms to spread on their own and not force us into a box. And I think that's what like fan fiction, for example, is. So like people who allow fan fiction, the fandom spreads. If you're like, no, you're not allowed to write about these characters, they belong to us, then we're like, all right, we'll stop thinking about that. And then we'll move on to something else.
Right. Like, I love your example from Adobe.
Yeah, Adobe's website has, you know, when you're very casually say, oh, we Photoshopped this, you know, like everyone says that. On Adobe's website, they actually say, Photoshop is not a verb. The correct grammar is you use Adobe Photoshop software.
But then with the R next to it, the little R with a circle on it. So Adobe R, Photoshop R software.
Exactly. And we're like, but no one's going to do that. That's like what?
You want us to be a robot.
Yeah.
There's fandom and being a robot don't go together.
Right. And the funny thing is I was linked to this page from Tumblr where I was honestly looking up like tricks on Adobe. Like, oh, I want to do this on Photoshop. Like, and then artists would actually, you know, post tutorials on what brushes they use and what filters they use, and it's cool. And I'm like, oh, I can learn from that and use the software. And somehow they're like, no.
No, you're not allowed to do that.
No, you're not allowed to do that.
We don't want you to talk about us.
No.